Rome, both its influence and impact. The influence of Rome can be broken down into four categories: art, architecture and engineering, language and writing, and philosophy, law, and citizenship. So, Rome borrowed a lot of its ideas and features from Greece. Um, one of these main influences were Greco Roman statues. The Greeks really were into trying to make lifelike statues for numerous different things. However, the Romans really excelled at doing this and thus had many of these really extremely lifelike statues throughout their civilization. They were also patrons of the arts, meaning that they supported the arts, especially those who were rich. They would have such Greco-Roman statues in their homes to depict not only themselves, but past family members, political figures, etc. They also were big fans of murals, mosaics, and frescoes, which they did really well. So murals are paintings on the wall, like you would see at a restaurant. Mosaics are a bunch of different tiles or small pieces put together to make a picture. And frescoes are kind of like a 3D painting on the wall, where it looks almost like as if you're looking through the wall to see a different landscape. They also use decorative bottles, which could be made to look like different things, such as, for example, they might make a wine bottle that looked like grapes. They advanced and developed gem cutting and metalworking, and they also used what are called cameos, Roman cameos, which are carved images that depict a scene of some kind. So their architecture and engineering, they developed what's called the vault and dome. So a vault is essentially a archway that's used as a roof or to support a roof, which we see in most modern buildings as some form of arch. A dome is kind of a half circle used as a roof. They also heavily relied upon concrete, which, although they didn't invent it, they became perfecters of it. In other words, they used it in just about everything and to greater extents than anybody had ever even attempted to use in the past. One such example is the Roman Colosseum. This was used to distract individuals from the day-to-day routine and things that were going on in the government, such as corruption and stuff like that. It was also used as a huge form of entertainment and was a huge open-roofed building that was a giant circle, much like the football coliseums you see today. One of the biggest developments of the Colosseum was the tunnels leading into the Colosseum that allowed stadium viewers to get to their seats more easily. Another big influence of the Roman Empire is on the church and the cathedrals that you see littered throughout both America and Europe, as many of them use Roman-type designs. One of the biggest accomplishments of the Roman Empire was their vast use of roadway, which they used the concrete to build. And they had over 50,000 miles of road, which was ridiculous for back then, and greatly helped them in spreading their empire because it allowed them to transport troops rather quickly. In fact, in Europe, some of the old Roman roads still exist and have been kind of modernized and upkept to make them travelable. Another big impact of the Roman Empire architecture and engineering is the aqueduct. Though the aqueduct was already created, what they did was they revolutionized it and used it far much more in depth than people had in the past. In fact, they used it to bring water across such far expanses or distances that it even allowed for people to have running water in their own home for things such as baths. Though not everyone was able to have baths, mostly just the wealthy. But there were large public baths. The influence of the Romans in writing and language is through the use of Latin, which was the Roman language. You see this primarily, especially in the early church, as most of the church scribes would use Latin to write down important documents and scrolls. We also see three primary languages that all came from Latin, and that is Italian, Spanish, and French. Now, English is more of a Germanic speaking language. However, it does have heavy ties to Latin, as the Normans, who were French speaking people, conquered England in 1066 CE. Also, we get our calendar year, or our 12 months of our calendar, from the Roman calendar. Many English words are prefixes, which are words that have specific meanings and are tied to what's called a root word. We also use many Roman proverbs, like the one on the back of the penny, which means from one many. And we still see Roman numerals, which were the Roman number system, being used today. Finally, we have philosophy, law, and citizenship, which are system of law, justice, and even somewhat philosophy comes from not only the Greeks but also the Romans. So the Greeks gave the Romans the concept of Stoicism, which is essentially the belief of godly intelligence that ruled all of nature, and that the person's soul was the spark of that divine intelligence. Thus, living rightly meant living in a way that agreed with nature, which is why you see people who are calm by nature often be called stoic. Now, this also led to the Romans' idea of justice, or the belief in trying to deal with people as justly as possible. Now, they believed that people were born with natural rights or natural laws were already in motion, and they were kind of the pioneers for that. Though they didn't always deal with people fairly, because they dealt with poor people, for example, more harsh than they did wealthy people, much like we see happening today. For example, a person who's an athlete, pro athlete, is more likely to get off of a speeding ticket than the average person, just because they're an athlete and well known. But they did try their best, and a lot of their ideas are still seen today. Also, the final concept is citizenship. Now, in Rome, this started out with just being the people of Rome being considered citizens, but then as they began to conquer more and more territory, they began to expand that to anybody under the Roman banner. So, in other words, anybody that became a people of Rome through being conquered would become Roman citizens. Nowadays, that's similar to our society in that we have the concept of, for example, here in the US, many of us are considered U.S. citizens, but then we're citizens because we were born here, or because we passed certain tests and pledged allegiance to the United States, or pledged loyalty to the United States. Now, what that means is as well as back then and currently, is that essentially, if you're a citizen, not only do you have responsibility to the United States, but also you get certain privileges. Well, it was the same back then for Roman citizens. So, in summary, the four main areas that you need to pay attention to are how Roman influenced art, how they influenced architecture and engineering, how they influenced writing and language, and how they influenced philosophy, law, and citizenship.